Let's look at angles of elevation and depression. So the angle of elevation is the angle between the horizontal and line of sight up to an object. So in this example, we've got a diagram where we've got a person looking up to a house on a hill. The angle of elevation is formed by looking at the horizontal line of sight and the line of sight from the person to the house. So this angle in red is the angle of elevation. If we look at the second diagram, we've got another person looking up to a building, and again we draw on the horizontal line of sight and the line of sight up to the object, and the angle in between is the angle of elevation. The angle of depression is the angle between the horizontal and line of sight down to an object. So again, we've got two diagrams. The first diagram has a person on a hill looking down to a house. We draw the horizontal line of sight and the line of sight down to the object, and the angle between the two lines is the angle of depression. Similarly, we've got a person on top of a high platform and they're looking down to a ball. So we draw the horizontal line of sight, the line of sight down to the object, and then the angle between is the angle of depression. So the question says, a 14-foot ladder is used to scale a 13-foot wall. At what angle of elevation must the ladder be in order to reach the top of the wall? So what we should first do is draw a diagram for the information that we've been given. So we're told that a 14-foot ladder is used to scale a 13-foot wall. So if we draw a wall and represent it by a straight vertical line, then this wall is 13 feet. We have a ladder which is 14 feet and is used to scale this wall. So in other words, we have some point on the ground that the ladder is placed on, and then the ladder is used to scale all the way to the top of this wall. So we can label this with 14 feet. We see that we can form a right angled triangle and then use trigonometry to work out the angle of elevation that is asked in this question. So remember, the angle of elevation is the angle that's formed with the horizontal line of sight and the line of sight from the point to what's being looked at. So in this case, we've got the ladder and we're going all the way up to the wall. So our angle of elevation is labeled as theta, and so we can now use trigonometry to work out what theta is. So in this case, we have the opposite side and the hypotenuse, and so we use sine theta equals to the opposite side, 13 feet, over the hypotenuse, which is 14 feet. So this becomes sine theta equals to 13 over 14, and so taking inverse sine of both sides, we have theta equals to sine inverse of 13 over 14. We put on a calculator to one decimal place, we find that theta equals to 68.2 degrees, and so therefore the angle of elevation is 68.2 degrees. One final example. So the question says, from an aeroplane at an altitude of 1,200 meters, the angle of depression to a building on the ground measures 28 degrees. Find the distance from the plane to the building. And so again, since we have a worded question, to help us make sense of the information, we should draw a diagram. So the first thing is that we have an aeroplane at an altitude of 1,200 meters. So if we draw a diagram of an aeroplane, then we are told that this aeroplane is at an altitude of 1,200 meters. In other words, from ground level, this aeroplane is 1,200 meters high, and so we can label this as 1,200 meters. Then we're told that the angle of depression to a building on the ground, so if we draw a small building on the ground, we are told that the angle of depression is 28 degrees. So remember, the angle of depression is formed with the horizontal line of sight. So in this case, the aeroplane has a horizontal line of sight going in this direction, and the line of sight from the aeroplane to the building on the ground. So in other words, this diagonal that is formed here. Now, something that's very important to note is that the angle of depression is always formed with the horizontal. So this angle that we might be able to form here is not the angle of depression. The angle of depression would be this angle that we can form here. So if we mark this on and label it as 28 degrees, then that is the angle of depression. Instead of writing 1,200 meters here, we could replace this and write it over here. since the altitude of the aeroplane is 1,200 meters. So essentially what we've got is a right angled triangle, and we've got an angle and we've got a side length, and we're asked to work out the distance from the plane to the building. So the distance from the plane to the building is given by the diagonal that we have here. So if we label that as x, then the distance from the plane to the building is what we're trying to work out. Trigonometry, we have the opposite side and the hypotenuse, and so we have that sine of 28 degrees equals to the opposite side, 1,200 meters, over the hypotenuse, which is x meters. And so this simplifies to sine of 28 degrees equals to 1,200 over x. If we multiply both sides by x, we get x multiplied by sine of 28 degrees, which equals to 1,200. And then divide both sides by sine of 28 degrees, we have x equals to 1,200 divided by sine of 28 degrees. If we put this in a calculator and round our answer to one decimal place, we find that we get a value of 2,556.1 meters. And so therefore, the distance from the plane to the building is 2,556.1 meters.